Do a quick start after. Okay. So hello everyone, and welcome to our first talk in this series of talks on human-centric design, organized at De Montfort University, Leicester School of Art, Design and Architecture. This is Sahara Abdel Wahab, and I am a lecturer at De Montfort University. I will be your host today for today's talk, and we will have a special guest from Velux. We have the architect Richard William. Hi, Richard.
Hello there, and hello everybody.
So we can start by having a quick welcome to the people who are attending with us today. And I will just introduce you, or if you want to do so, please go ahead.
Yeah, I can still do that. My name is Richard Williams. As Sahar has just kindly said, I've been with the Velux company for some 30 years. And prior to that, I'm the senior architectural development manager within the company. And we're engaging within architects and universities for some time now. And prior to that, I used to work as an architect's technician back in the day when there was things like tracing paper, roller, sort of pens, and razor blades, which is a slightly sort of different concept of how we used to design and draw sort of buildings down. So I've been within your industry for many, many years, and delighted today to share with you what we do within Velux.
Thank you, Richard, very much. You're free to open your camera. I'm going to close mine when you start the presentation. So yeah, I think we will have around 40 minutes for the presentation, more or less, and then we're happy to receive your questions. There is a question and ask tab. You can just, or you can use a chat to drop your questions. So Richard, the floor is yours.
I appreciate that. And you can see my screen now, can't you? I'm assuming.
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. Well, first of all, thank you so much indeed for this opportunity. Delivering sustainable homes with better future is the heart of what Velux are all about, and it's all to do with daylight and ventilation. Velux, the VE, is for ventilation and Lux is for light. And we know that sustainable design is super important, especially within our industry. But essentially, what I like to sort of start with, being within the architectural mold, you may be aware that or you may not be aware, the average size practice is about 8 to 10 people. We have now 60 architects throughout the world within our organization. And we are doing three main things. Discover, which is sharing information like we are today to give some inspiration of the kind of work we get involved with. The second is develop, to refine your project with the architect and support with different design guides and aspects that we have, and also then to deliver and execute your project. So we've got a raft of information that you can pull upon. And so please get in contact with Velux, where we can assist from CAD to BIM objects to a variety of different things, some of which I will share today. But today, what we'll be looking at, there'll be three main areas. One, there'll be let there be light. The second one will be a new approach to housing, which is really, really interesting. And the third one, I'll just summarize on some of the sustainability and a couple of products that we have. But essentially, we are the indoor generation. We spend 90% of our time indoors. So we'll be touching on things like that. And we've done some studies around Europe to see what kind of homes we're living in. And we've done some model experiments and the principles of that, which I will happily sort of share with you going forward. But first of all, let there be light. I guess it's an obvious thing to say, and it's probably day one, chapter one on the course you have. Without light, we wouldn't exist. And essentially, it's probably the most important thing that we do. And wherever we do, if it be walking down the street, you probably walk down the sunny side as opposed to the shadow. You probably go into a restaurant and sit by the window as opposed to the dark space. So it's all around us. And vitamin D is so important to us as well. And it's a natural aspect. And so it is the most important ingredient that we have. And without it changes throughout the day. We all know that it rises in the east and sets in the west, and that's always going to be the case. So I guess whichever project or site you go to, you get out your compass or your whatever device you have, and you look at the orientation, and then you can design your buildings around the best suitable aspect of getting that all important daylight into the rooms. And it affects us all, whether you're living in the countryside or the city. And the kind of buildings you have to think of how that impacts on other surrounding buildings when you're designing sort of taller buildings or any sort of buildings from that perspective. And without daylight, there will be no colour. And so, again, super important as well when we're looking at sort of different materials you're using, how it reflects the light as well. And I guess it stimulates emotion. How do you feel on a gloomy, dull day when the fog's around, as opposed to a really bright, sunny day? It really stimulates emotion and stimulates productivity. So allowing that to come into our buildings is really important, no matter for our health and well-being. So without daylight, there's no life. So it reflects that. And that's basically why within our organization, it becomes a fundamental source, the VE from ventilation and the Lux from light. And so our main purpose is to create well-being for people and planet by transforming spaces using the natural daylight and ventilation that is all around us. I won't share a film with you, but we commissioned a film which is called The Indoor Generation. And part of that is just assessing the kind of lives that we all live in the homes and the workplaces that we are in. And why that is so important, we spend an alarming 90% of our time indoors. So if you think of that a different way, we only spend 2 hours 40 outside. And when you think of it, we get 90% of our vitamin D from the sun, and yet we spend 90% of our time indoors. There's obviously a parallel that is not really existing there. So it's really important to allow that light to come into our buildings. Interestingly as well, the indoor generation, as I mentioned, we're spending all of our time. It has shown that it's 5 more times polluted than the outdoor air. And a 50-year-old would have spent 45 years indoors. So the building environment, the buildings you're designing and the buildings of the future and the places where we're living and working and breathing is really, really important, because that's where we are today. So that's why within Velux, we created a study, which we do every year since 2015, all the way up to the current year. And it's called the Healthy Homes Barometer. And please, I urge you to go and download a copy online for this. And essentially, it's a study of how we are living throughout Europe, and there's different metrics within that. So it'd be different from France to Italy to the UK. But essentially, some harsh reading really within that sadly 1 in 6 Europeans report living in an unhealthy building. 60% of Europeans also report their health is poor when they're living in damp and badly lit homes. And I know recently, I think it was ITV did a study or commission and a report on a lot of mold and damp areas, which causes a lot of asthma and poor health because we're not venting our homes out. And some of that reason is because we think of heat poverty, but ironically, you really need to air your rooms out 3 to 5 times a sort of day as a minimum. And within that process, 40% of people are more likely to have asthma or COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary diseases, due to the poor indoor. So now we know those facts. It is so important then to do something about that in the designs that you're creating for the future. So our founder was a guy called Willem Rasmussen. It's a Danish organization, and it's still family owned. And innovation is part of his DNA. And he professed that one experiment is better than 1,000 expert views. And that's exactly what he has done. And we've done as an organization, taken his story further. So for the last 20 odd years, we've been doing many, many experiments, and we did actually a thing called Model Home 2020. And again, if you Google that, each of these on here, we've done over 30. Each of those we have case studies for, and it's some interesting reading. But I share maybe a couple of examples with you. On the far left-hand side, I think it was in Vienna. It was quite a tight site, and they were using very sort of sharp lines in an area on quite a steep hill. And we're looking to see how volumetrically we can use that space, and using the sharp lines and the contrast of that landscape to get the light placed in certain areas so you get maximum light. On the top right-hand side, it's not just housing we do. There's a faculty in Copenhagen where we looked at the study of how we work and learn in areas. And the middle one is over in East Berlin, which is a retrofit program. We took an existing housing stock of a 1930s house, which was quite run down, and we renovated that and did a retrofit program and looked at that and see how a family would live. And the bottom right-hand side is a bit closer to home. This was I would say an average 5-bedroomed plot that we got from a developer. And then we said, could we just put 2 plots in, a 4-bedroom and a 3-bedroom next to each other, and we increased the volume of it. And we had families in each of these properties and studied how they live, breathe, their well-being, how many times they open the window or open the blinds, and just to sort of looked at all those metrics to find out exactly how healthy those buildings were. And that led us on to an asset called the active home principles, or active house principles, where essentially it's trying to look at the envelope of a building, trying to look at how fresh air comes in and circulates through it, a bit like the sort of chimney stack effect, allowing facade windows and doors to open and ventilate. So not just allowing the all-important daylight to come in, but allow the VOCs and the toxins to escape. So this started a thing called the active house principles, and this is not knocking anything from passive house at all, but passive house is keeping everything in and quite tight. And we feel active house principles around the world is allowing a building to breathe due to climate conditions. So if it gets too warm or too hot, the windows open, and it gets too cold, they can sort of shut down. And if it gets too stuffy in a room, the windows will open as well to allow that air change. And I guess sometimes part of that is, an analogy would be, if you ever get on an aeroplane or a flight and you're in this tube in there, you can't open any windows for obvious reasons, but it's how do you feel? You could feel quite stuffy. And even if you're in a hotel, modern hotels now, a lot of the windows you can't open. And if you've had feel a bit stuffy from the night before or whatever, you really want that burst of natural ventilation to come in and fresh air, and sometimes that's not always possible. So the active house is looking at 3 main areas. It's looking at the comfort, it's looking at the environment, and it's looking at the energy within that. And there's not necessarily a right or wrong, but we created like a spider's web. And so within those 3 elements, the comfort, the energy, and the environment, there are 9 different parameters, and we score those parameters on a scale going from 0 to 5. And there's not necessarily a right or wrong. It's just to say, well, actually, is there enough daylight, or whatever those parameters are. So we look at the daylight, we look at the thermal environment, the indoor air quality, acoustic quality. So as an example, you might have really good acoustic quality because you use some dense glazing or triple glazing, but that will then limit the amount of daylight coming into the building, because obviously being triple glazed opposed to double glazed, it will have different effects on the amount of daylight going from the outside pane into that. So a balance is done, but a holistic tool that is available, which you can sort of see. And there's a lot of people who are involved within that, not just Velux, although we started that. A lot of key investors from around the world, and it's an ongoing sort of process. And that allowed us then to apply the active house principles to a variety of different projects which I shared with you before. And I would like now to just share with you a couple of, or one example. So what we looked at this on the retrofit program, we looked at actually taking an existing building you see on the top left-hand side, allowing the daylight to come penetrating deep into the room, into the heart of the building, but equally so, and as important, if not more important, to allow that chimney stack effect to open up windows on the facade and allow the cold air to push the warm air out and remove any moist, damp air that may fall within that building. So we looked at two projects. We looked at one in Slovakia and one in Belgium, and the one on the right-hand side in Belgium is the example I'll share with you today. But as you can see from this building, whilst it's in Belgium, it could be, it's not atypical to houses or places you would find over here in GB and Ireland as well. So we looked at basically 7 elements to an affordable climate renovation. We looked at how we would utilize the attic. If it's an unused attic, then that's wasted space. So it's really good to use unwasted space for allowing more sort of space within that area. We increased the window area to allow that all-important natural daylight ventilation to come in. Reevaluating the staircases to see how that flows within that. And also with overheating nowadays, especially with the change of building regulations, sunscreening is really important, and indeed external shutters really important to reduce the amount of heat coming into those areas. So you can sort of see we did this, and lastly you'll see we actually built an extension on this property as well, just to maximise that floor area and look at the design within it. So as you can see, it was quite run down before on the top left-hand side, but we transformed it by the attic conversion in the extension. On the top right-hand side, you'll see that the attic was an unused and unutilized attic, bit of storage or just wasted really. And you can see by looking into that and evaluating that, we sort of transformed that into a far better living area. And again, we jiggled around with the indoor sort of walls really just to renovate that, turning it into a nice, more amenable area. And like all these experiments, what we sort of tried to do, we applied our principles sort of to that. And you can see that, like I said, or was in Belgium is not atypical. This could be any street, anywhere, any place type thing. And what was so interesting, once we did the first experiment, the local authority then thought, this is great, we'll roll that out. We didn't do the rollout, and 86 similar homes were converted. So one experiment is worth more than 1,000 expert views. And we had a similar one in Slovakia, similar story with a similar output. So these experiments really helped us out to consider what we're doing now, which is the main topic for today, which is living places. And living places is an event that we've done, or more than an event, it's a concept, and there's a partnership we did with a bunch of architects in Copenhagen called Effect, and Artilia were the contractors within this. And essentially what we wanted to do, we wanted to transform space into favoured living places, and we're evaluating what we're doing now in building stock, and to say, let's just do something different, different. We're living a lot closer together in cities, but becoming more further apart. And part of this process, we wanted to bring the outdoor environment in and the indoor environment out, and actually bring and connect and have that connectivity with both healthy living by including different things like outdoor spaces and allotments so they can do their vegetables and do a variety of things, and really bring the communities sort of together for obvious reasons. So why did we do this? Well, when you look at the global CO2 emissions per sector, it's quite significant. And building operations account for 28%. And that is basically the heating and cooling of buildings. So if we can then adapt the design so the heating and cooling buildings is minimized from artificial mechanical ventilation, which you can't do without, but you can actually utilize the all-important heating and circulation by good design of both facade and roof windows, then it's going to be a good thing. And then the other aspect, you can see that 9% of building materials within that construction makes up for the CO2. So a significant impact the industry has. 37% accounts for all CO2 on the global stage. And that's why probably going forward, the houses that you're doing and what you're designing are really, really important. And that's why we looked at it. In addition to that, when you look at the global building floor area, it's expected to double by 2026. So if you think of the amount of challenges we have today, that's only going to get even more challenging. So the way we look at buildings, the way we're designing buildings, the way we're living in buildings, because we're spending 90% of our time in there, is really, really important. So now I'll introduce you to the concept of living places. As you can see here, it's just on the outskirts of Copenhagen. The site was a site just to show a showcase of what could happen and the methodology of design. And whilst there were 6 different hubs, some of these were just sort of showcasing how we present certain areas, but there are 2 pods within here, which I'll go into in a moment. And we launched this quite timely at the UIA, the International Architects Conference, which we hosted and sponsored in Copenhagen last year. The great news as well, with the thousands of people who visited the Velux group when we won the Sustainability Award of 2022 based on this aspect. And so we're very, very proud to be part of that journey. So what is it, and what are the principles for living places? Well, there were 5 main key principles that we looked at. One, it clearly had to be healthy, which is the main thing, benefit for people and planet through careful selection of materials and building techniques. It had to be shared. We had to have the inclusivity of bringing people together and the strength in that community aspect. And like many, many good designs, had to be simple. Really, really keep things so simple, but also their simplicity had to be adaptive by making the same Lego box and repeating that time and time again. Control or delete type thing is not really the way forward in our eyes. And because housing is such an important and housing stock is increasing, we need to design something that is going to be, and is scalable. So once we had the principles for those living places, there were 7 key challenges we looked at. And it seems a busy slide, but I'll try and summarize that in each bullet point. The building lifespan now is halved in the last century. So buildings are basically not lasting as long as they used to do for many reasons. And when we look at the buildings we're actually doing today, 1/3 of projects come within 10% of the budget over the last 3 years. So we're actually not really not necessarily designing but managing buildings particularly well within the budgets that we're suggesting. And as I mentioned beforehand, the building is responsible for a significant 40% of the global CO2, which is huge. And that's why we really need to meet those challenges and create something better. And as I mentioned before, we spend all of our time indoors, 90% of our time indoors. So therefore, the indoor generation, which we are all part of, we need to do. And that leads into this loneliness, that we are feeling more lonely, although with the high-rise buildings we're living closer together. So changing a new concept of design is quite good. And it has to be affordable. More people are now living in cities. And after the post-pandemic, we're reevaluating how we live, and we're reevaluating what is really important to us. So all these challenges we put together with the 5 scalable aspects, and I guess the output was we're going from flat roof design and really maximize the all-important slope roof, not only because it allows deep penetration of sunlight into the heart of a building, but also allows the ventilation to come through as well. And looking at the different topographies, you can see from a high design to quite a lower design, you can see better daylight and taking consideration the natural sort of sun as it comes down to the height of the buildings, so they're not really sort of given too much shadow on the building next to to them. So this slide I'll explain. It's split into half. On the left-hand side, you'll see what we call a benchmark house, and this is what we calculated everything upon. We took an average house in Copenhagen, average house in Denmark, and we did the calculations on the amount of embodied CO2 within that. So everything connected to every single building material we had. And that metric was about 11.1 kilograms per CO2 per meter squared per year. So that is the metric. So let's just call it 11. So with Effect Architects and with Velux and Artilia, we then came up with what we feel is far better, and we reduced that down to 3.8, which is amazing. And I know that you probably won't be able to sort of shout out, but that is essentially 3 times better straight around a benchmark house. That is in Denmark. And if I asked a question now to all of you, and obviously I won't be able to hear, but if you just take a mental note of it, if you had to guess, say that what we do in the UK, so if 11 is not particularly good in Denmark and we reduce it down to 3.8, what do you think it will be in the UK? Some people might say 20, some people might say 30. It's in fact 70. So you can just sort of see what we're building in Denmark, which we feel is not particularly acceptable. What we're building here, there's a lot of movement that we can do in a positive direction to use this kind of methodology to reduce that CO2 within that aspect. So what did we do? If we look at the building system here, you can see from a bird's eye view, quite a simplistic sort of design, pitch roof as you imagine. The outer roof is clad in like a corrugated sort of fabric, and you can sort of see that punctured in the sort of top flat roofs and sort of flat roof windows and sloping roof windows on that. Quite a simplistic design, as you can see on the right hand side, clad in sort of timber. And on here you can see on the bottom these sort of shutters are like external, really basic but lovely design of just using a screen just to manage the daylight as it comes round if it gets too intense in certain areas, and it allows a bit of security as well, as you can see in the closed position on the top right hand side of that image. The floor plan itself was on ground floor, first floor and second floor. As you can see when you walk in the entrance door to the left here, you've got I guess on the east side or whatever orientation it is, a sort of downstairs sort of shower room. Very common for Danish living, very open plan living area, which is not uncommon that we have over here. And upstairs we have a breakout area, like a reading area or a study area, and going into sort of 2 further bedrooms here. And then that allows us to go to a very sort of magical area, open plan living on the top floor here as well from that. Which is again quite adaptable, and this is the void here looking down into here, so a very lovely volumetric kind of sort of approach. So the building system itself, there were 2 examples we did one in timber frame structure house, and then we thought, well, let's just look at it if we did it in CLT as well on the other example. I won't go into too much detail here for obvious reasons, but again, we have construction from the foundation to the facade, the slab and the interior wall, but we actually changed the ground floor slab to a screw foundation because it saved quite a significant amount on the CO2 within that aspect. And then the other option was quite similar in design, but just using a different building technique for the fabric of the building using CLT. And then we thought, well, we can calculate and just sort of see what will be the difference when we look at this. So quite very sort of fresh approach, very light, very airy. As you can see the sunlight cascading down here, but with the CLT on the left and the timber frame on the right hand side, it gives a different slight dynamic and a feeling to each of those different pods as the experiments went on. So the main crux of this and the thing behind it, like many projects, are the materials that you choose or wish to choose. And we created a compass model, which is a model to help calculate. It's a free tool available to help calculate the amount of CO2 and what we're doing within those areas. And we looked at the choice of colours as well, because colours, as I mentioned before, are really, really important with the daylight affecting that. And we base those colours on local materials that you found, really sort of getting back to the earthly aspect, bringing nature back into the realm of good design. So the next slide is quite busy, but I'll take my time to share with you what this is. You can see on these varying columns goes from foundations to terrain deck to the exterior walls, the interior walls as it goes along here. And the best way of describing this is when you go shopping in your local supermarket, you might go down the healthy aisle and you look at the different ingredients you would have for cooking your supper for that evening. And some people might go down the more unhealthy aisle. And it's exactly the same with the building materials that we have choices for and indeed go shopping for. So if we go back to the benchmark house, which is the house that we look on the metric, and the average house that is constructed with average materials over in Denmark. And when we did those calculations using that tool model, which I mentioned beforehand, then that gave us a metric of 11.1. So using those different aspects. So when we applied the same methodology to the next design, you can see we went down a different aisle and different choice of materials and thought, well, what would that do? And it actually churned out 3.8. So really reduced that down by using different kinds of materials and applying those in the designs that we were doing within that. And that was the timber frame structure. And we thought, well, actually, would it be a significant difference using CLT? But in fact, it didn't really. So you can sort of see they're both quite similar, very sort of minuscule sort of difference between the two, but significantly different than the benchmark house. And as you can see there, when you look at the benchmark house and then you look at the living places concept house that we did, we can reduce that down by 2/3. So unbelievable amount of stuff that we can do 3 times what we achieved. So going back to that model before, when you look at the different aspects and when we break everything sort of down, you can see one example here by using a different kind of foundation in its simplistic form, going from a slab form to a pile foundation. You can see we've made a significant reduction of 92% by just using that. Now, obviously, it's important to highlight that not all geology is different. So there will be areas and types of landscapes that you can't use that particular foundation in. And we're not saying that you pick this up and apply this to every building. It's not taking this and copy. It's to take some of these metrics and some of these ideas and applying it to the designs you're doing and say, what if? Because obviously the architecture in Copenhagen is quite different than the architecture in other areas. We've just done another scheme, development company over in the Netherlands. I've taken some of this concept and we're developing it over there. And again, there's interest now over in Sunderland City Council, which happens to be the Future City Expo 25. I would urge you to Google and see what they're doing there. And they're taking some of this methodology and applying it to some of the house designs over up here in the northeast. This is just an illustration here. It's a bit busy and hopefully not too confusing. So when we go on the timeline from extraction with having using timber, it's obviously very good. So you've got a benefit of using that because you've got embodied sort of carbon within that anyway before you fell the trees. So you're already on a plus when we look at that. And as you go through this process from extraction to production to construction, to using the building, to renovating the building and the end of life, you can see how the different, we can measure the CO2 and an embodied carbon within that aspect. And so again, when we look at that footprint, it reduces it by about 60% by using a different methodology of that. So I won't get into too much detail over here, but it just gives you the impression it's a good thing to do when you're looking at the benchmark house compared to our house that we have and indeed designed. So it was a one-family house, really, a timber frame and screw pile foundation, really maximising the natural ventilation. The heating system is a heat pump or air to water with radiators within that, and it all was calculated within the Danish building regulations. So again, it might be adaptations that are required because the building regulations in GB and Ireland are somewhat different than they are over there, but it's going to be very, very close to what we have. So looking at the design itself, as you can sort of see here, quite open and airy, as you can see on the illustration on the bottom left, clearly using some different products to allow light coming in at different levels, and indeed using flat roof sort of products here on the sort of top of that. When it comes to light, as I mentioned from the outset, light is the main source, and it always starts in the east and sets in the west. So the orientation allows us to do that. But if you allow just light coming in from a facade, however big that facade window is, it only comes into a limited part of a building. But when you actually place strategically roof windows and sloping parts, it allows a penetration of daylight to come into the center of the building, which you would not normally get from using just facade units only. So the placement of really strategic place units are really important. And the thermal environment is always important. We want to have a constant. We don't want to be too hot in the summer and too cold in the winter. We need an ambient temperature throughout the whole aspect. And if there's multiple occupants within any building, if you took a metric of any room that you're in of this CO2 that is built up and the carbon, so within that, in the first, whenever you go into your lecture theatres, when you sort of take a metric, it would probably be X. An hour later, you might feel a bit lethargic or so tired because there's no air change. And so it'd be X plus plus. So what we've done here, again, it's called the chimney stack effect. It allows air to circulate around the building. So by using a facade window or door, the window or the cold air comes in and it pushes the warm stale air up through. And if there weren't any openings on the top here, this is where you would get damp mold growing, which again is a catalyst to asthma and other ailments from that perspective. So it's not just one size fits all, and we thought, well, what would happen if? So you go from tiny to large, or using a different, still the same kind of aspect, but just to see what could achieve, because obviously we all live different. It has to be adaptive, which was part of our strategic sort of planning from this perspective, be it if it's one or two people in the home or multiple families within that, it had to be adaptable for the topologies that we were using. And then when you start looking that into the scalability, transforming places into favoured living spaces by using the outdoors and bringing some nature into it, it's really good for your mental health and well-being, and also it allows you to grow vegetables and other aspects. And then what if we put these topologies together? What if we started connecting those in the more urbanesque or more densely populated areas and start scaling it up even more, still using the same kind of design techniques? It would just allow us to have, I guess, bigger and better communities in the towns and cities that we are doing. So that is the sort of main area from that perspective, and then the next just sort of handful of slides is really sharing with you our sustainability pledge, which is really important from our perspective as an organisation. As I mentioned from the outset, 37% of global CO2 emissions stems from our industry, and 1 in 3 people today live in a poor indoor climate. So it's up to us to really sort of make that sort of change. And within our global climate targets, which we have from our organisation, we need to reduce by 2030 the emissions for our own operations by 100%, and we're sort of doing that. And by 2030, the value chain, which is our suppliers, we're looking to reduce that by 50%, so a significant amount. And that's not necessarily down to just a case of greenwashing by the fact that every tree we fell, we plant 5 new trees. We actually work with WWF and we have different forests that we manage, and so no trees are felled within that. So our sustainability pledge is quite significant. And another proud stat as well, albeit a busy slide, we've calculated, the only company I think in the world so far, certainly in the construction industry, we were founded by a Danish guy back in 1941, and we've calculated the amount of CO2 we will have in every single window that we've ever made and sold. So by 2041, we would have paid that back and taken that consideration for lifetime carbon neutral within our organisation, which we're very, very proud of. And part of that is removing zero or plastic from all of our products. And so 90% of our packaging for Velux is now paper-based throughout the whole of Europe. And our target for 2030 is to be 100% from that perspective. So we're quite close, but we're certainly getting there. Equal to so, all the materials we're looking at, as I mentioned before, our target is for 2030 to be 50% reduction of our carbon footprint. So we're constantly looking at all the products and the materials that we're using within that process, and looking at the value chain as well. So our own operations is, whilst it's a challenge, we feel very confident we can do that because our own operations account for 6%. But the value chain, the people we're relying on, is a significant amount, 94%. So what we've done to assist that is things like our products can be purchased from any builders merchants, and we used to deliver about 5 or 6 times a week into those. And now we're saying, well, we can deliver, but it's only going to be sort of 2 days. You go pick. So those small steps make a big difference on that value chain. So lastly, to conclude really on the strategic messaging on this, is just to say that actually roof windows for health, well-being and energy efficiency are really important, and it's a simple design that are probably the most effective design. The indoor air has been shown to be up to 5 times more polluted than the outdoor air, and we can actually utilize our product to make sure there's air changes within that. And also by using this, the product energy efficiency, roof windows can save heating on sunny winter because it's solar radiation. So the placement that on south-facing windows is really important. And again, what you can do using external shutters, it allows you to reduce if it gets really intense. But also for cooling, when it gets too hot, the cross ventilation and the chimney stack effect allow it to cool naturally, as opposed to using mechanical ventilation. And as you probably saw in some of the images, using open places and open spaces and allowing that all-important daylight to come in, it really gives the impression that it gives a lot more volumetric space within the buildings that you're designing. So lastly, just one slide really just to share with you that we have a variety of different aspects, a whole host of different products, from single units to multiple units to sun screening and external shutters to flat roof windows, and many aspects. So no matter if you're going from horizontal to vertical, from an entry point to a premium product, we have it in our portfolio. And interestingly as well, that solar collectors, which are super important, used to be a barrier to ourselves, because obviously if you've got a solar collector, it reduces the amount of roof windows you can put in. So we teamed up with 2 organizations, one called GSE and the other called Viridian, where we can integrate a solar collector flashing to our product on here. And again, flat roof windows now are becoming ever more popular, because you can extend further out. And it used to be, not the best way to use flat roofs, but the technology now on flat roofs and to weatherproof them is far better now. And that's something why we can incorporate our products within that. We also have, which you can download for free of charge, a thing called a daylight visualizer, which allows you to look at the kind of drawings and studies you're doing, and it can look at calculating the amount of daylight that you have in those areas and the kind of renders that you can have. So a lot of aspects that we have within that, really. And like many things with technology, you can open and close the windows using your cell phones or different metrics. So if it gets too hot, the windows open. If it gets too cold, they shut down. If the CO2 builds up in an area, then the windows will open. And again, in high humidity areas, if there's kitchens and bathrooms, there's different metrics as well, and they will open to evaluate that really. So that really concludes really at the moment where I am. Daylight and fresh air are essential for health and well-being. And although it's gone through quite swiftly,